Hi guys, my name is Spilo. This is the first of a series that I hope to continue once a week called First Fights and Analysis. And what I'm going to be doing is I'm going to be taking the very first fight in a specific Overwatch League map, Overwatch League matchup, Overwatch League game, and then breaking down exactly what happens. Now, what I'm going to try and do with this is, or do with these rather, is to not just go, this is what happened, this is who won, but I want to pick a specific concept or a coaching concept or a strategic concept that was displayed in that first fight and kind of go more in depth on it outside of just what happened in that initial matchup. So I am going to talk about the first fight, what happens, who wins, who loses, and why. And then I want to kind of pick what specific topic that I have chosen and then go more in detail on that outside of just that initial instance of it. So we're going to be seeing the London Spitfire versus the Philadelphia Fusion, the first fight in Overwatch League for this season. So this is exciting. And I'm going to let it play because we're going to be seeing a matchup between two compositions that we don't always see. And this is the floats versus goats matchup. So I call it floats. A lot of people call it dive goats, but it doesn't really matter. It's monkey goats, okay? So we have the Winston versus the Reinhardt here. Now, let's talk about why I think these choices are made and how these compositions function. Now, goats, everybody I think kind of has an understanding of how goats works. There's 3-3. Everybody runs into a target and kills the target. And if you can't do that, then you just sit on point, wait for them to come to you, and then kill them on point, because Goats has fabulous objective pressure because there's so much healing, so much sustain, so many defensive resources, whether it's shields, right, bubbles, matrix. Just the fact that that healing is AoE with many of Goat's resources means that it has a lot of sustain. So you can sit on point even against DPS comps, and it's difficult for DPS comps to dig you out. So you don't even necessarily have to speed onto it. But that's obviously not exactly what we're going to be seeing against floats, because the Winston Goats counterpart is all about utilizing your Goats backline and your Winston front line. Now, Winston is better than Reinhardt in two different aspects. He has the mobility and he has more consistent cleave. So with the mobility, it allows him to isolate and place himself and to contest different things that the Reinhardt cannot. So let's say you're running Winston Goats against a sniper composition. Winston can contest the snipers, Reinhardt cannot. Think about Winston versus even a normal dive team. Winston can threaten their Zenyatta, force the team to peel back, whereas Ryan can just hold shield. Ryan can't do a lot there. So often Winston Goats is better into dive, whereas Reinhardt Goats is better in the Goats versus Goats matchup, because Winston, while he has AoE damage, he is squishier than Ryan. He doesn't have as much armor, and his shield bubble is only 600 HP as opposed to 2000 HP. And while comparing bubble and shield isn't exactly fair, because bubble has the capability to isolate, shield doesn't, in the Goats versus Goats matchup, Winston bubble isn't as effective. And so when you see Winston Goats versus Ryan Goats, the Goats with the Winston really can't take the brawl fight without setting it up properly, because if they just run at each other, Ryan hammer swinging and then shielding when he needs to, Winston shoots his gun, he places bubble bursts basically instantly, and then he dies, right? And then they lose the fight. So Winston Goats can't take that fight like that. Winston has to be clever. Winston has to be sneaky. Winston has to try and use high ground to drop onto the back line of the Philadelphia Fusion. And even though Winston by himself, especially when we're talking about Zenyatta, Lucio, Brig, Diva, Winston by himself isn't enough to actually kill anything in the backline. He provokes a response. He manipulates attention. And when the attention is then devoted to that Winston, that means that the rest of his team core, the Zenyatta, the Lucio, the Brig, the Diva, and the Zarya, all who can do respectable damage on their own, right? Then choose one of the less mobile targets from the Fusion, usually the Brig or the Zarya, and kill that. So actually in this instance, it's usually not the Zenyatta Lucio. You use your Winston to manipulate attention, places his bubble. He cuts off the healing aura of the Brig. He cuts off the healing aura of the Lucio, right? He makes it so that it's difficult to assist that Zenyatta, right? and then they have to go and deal with the Winston. Maybe they overcommit, and then when they go, all the resources that were given to the Winston to try and get him out of there, then these guys can clean up, right? Because now that Brig doesn't have armor pack anymore. That Zarya isn't going to be able to get healing orb, right? Because, you know, that Zarya is not going to get the Brig Inspire aura or the Lucio aura, right? Because the bubble's cutting it off, right? Or, you know, that Diva used boosters to peel back to her Zenyatta so she can no longer peel for her Brig, right? So it manipulates the team's attention. It forces them to commit, and then you punish that committal. So Winston is really not expendable, but Winston himself is not supposed to get a lot of to get kills. He could put a lot of cleave pressure, in other words, cleave being AoE pressure, area of effect. He could put a lot of damage on a lot of targets at the same time, but he's not really supposed to get the elimination. He's just there to force a reaction. And that's something that's important because vision manipulation must stem from a threat, okay? Think of it this way. You are playing Tracer, right? You are playing Tracer, and one of the great things about Tracer is that you can sneak up in Zenyatta's and one-clip them, or Ana's and one-clip them, and you kill them, and that's terrifying, right? So we always talk about with Zenyatta's and Ana's, you need to be tracking where the enemy Tracer is. You need to keep an eye on her, because you can't have her surprise you. If she surprises you, you're in a significant disadvantage in that matchup, even if you do receive help. So you need to use your vision to know where the Tracer is, when the Tracer is coming, and anticipate that and defend against that as fast as you can. So, you know, you've got high level Anas and Zens, and they're doing this, you know, where's that Tracer, you know, right? And so even if the Tracer doesn't actually do anything, she demands vision, which is value in of itself, because that means that Ana and Zenyatta is not doing as good of a job assisting their front line, putting pressure on the enemy's front line, right? So the Tracer can sit AFK, and as long as she makes an appearance now and then enough to provoke a response, then she's contributing something. And that's kind of what the Winston does here. But like I said, vision has to be generated by threat. Because if you're a GM Zen, you're playing up against a bronze Tracer, right? And the Tracer's just terrible. Her mechanics are terrible. Her positioning is bad. She's slow. She doesn't know how to use her blings to avoid. Then you're not even really concerned about the Tracer. You know that you could let her shoot you in the back and then turn around and headshot melee and she's dead. You know, it's not really a concern of yours. So you don't need your vision manipulated because you know that she's not a threat. So for vision to be manipulated, you have to show the enemy team that you're a threat. The enemy team has to respect you, right? That's a very important concept. The only way that you're going to be able to pull vision off is if the enemy team thinks that you're an actual threat. And so in this situation, using the Winston, maybe with the Zarya bubble and maybe with Harmony Orb on the back line, that's a viable threat. That Zenyatta might die. He might not die right away, but he might die if he doesn't receive assistance. Okay. So what we're going to have here is we're going to see London Spitfire attempting to use vision manipulation to beat a bad matchup. Now, why we're running Winston here instead of Ryan, I don't really know. I know Jester is generally known for his better Winston than his Reinhardt, but again, in general, this matchup usually is on the Philadelphia Fusion's end of the game. Even on a map like this where there is a lot of high ground to stage, because if we tab over here, you can kind of see maybe Winston, the Reinhardt, Fusion are. I'm going to swap over to Visor here, and they're using, you know, maybe they're all set up here, and so maybe Gesture sets up here, and maybe the Diva tries to drive him out, but the Diva gets discorded and shot down, and then she just drops, and maybe Gesture gets an opportunity to drop on the back line, right? I don't think that would be the case unless they already had point. Maybe we see Jester using one of these high grounds, because remember what we're talking about, we want to be able to use our Winston to drop onto the back line and not jump onto the back line, because even though the jump pack damage is significant, it means that you're there and you're not getting away. So there's a very real possibility that our Winston's going to die. Whereas if our Winston drops, he can provide almost exactly the same amount of backline pressure and backline threat with still having his leap to be able to get out when things get hot. So anyway, there is a lot of significant high ground on this map. Maybe they thought that they could manipulate it. Maybe they didn't have confidence in the Ryan versus Ryan matchup. I'm just going to see what happens, and we'll go from there. So So you're going to notice London Spitfire claims high ground here. Again, this kind of plays into what we'd expect a Winston Goats team to be. You're going to notice Gesture hugs corners much tighter than even a Ryan would, because he knows if he swings wide, he's going to be forced to burn bubble. And then once bubble's off the table, the Spitfire are at a significant disadvantage because their bubble is a long cooldown. It's not easily replenishable like a Reinhardt shield. So again, we're playing high ground here. We're playing low ground. I'm not really sure. They're just kind of feeling each other out right now. So Jester's going to back out, as he has to. He can't stay in there as long as a Reinhardt can. So I think Fusion thinks that they're going to threaten rotating up top here. They're going to provoke a drop response, and once they drop, the superior Brawl team, which is the Reinhardt team, can then speed onto and kill whoever's there. Unfortunately, the London Spitfire are having nothing of it. So that fake rotation doesn't provide anything. But I think that's the level of coaching that we're at in this level of Overwatch, which is encouraging. Like I'm pretty sure that was a design play to try and bait a drop, which is pretty cool. So there's Bubble, and now that we've seen Bubble, and Bubble really didn't really do anything. I think it was an attempt to catch EQO, who's a little slow in the rotation, but Bubble didn't do anything. So right now, Bubble's out of the equation now. So this means that Philadelphia Fusion can now easily rotate to point without any fear. You're going to see a lot of the times that teams that are moving from point A to point B, during that transition, that is when teams like to jump. Even though we're not talking about dive specifically here, we're talking about a mobile hero that the game plan relies on him using his mobility, right? But I don't think he can do that anymore because he just used his bubble, right? So that's a crucial part of this, because without bubble, not only does he die faster, it's harder for him to actually kill targets, because that Lucio and Brig Aura, their healing is no longer split off. Okay, so that bubble is off the table, and now Fusion no longer has to worry about, oh, we're going from point A to point B. They might jump us on the way and catch us in disarray. That's no longer a factor anymore. So they're going to go ahead and rotate to point now. Now this is a good move from Fusion, because they know if they're on point, Spitfire have to come on top of them. And as we've already said, Winston is not as good in brawl situations. Now, if Spitfire were on point first, right, for whatever reason, and Winston sitting behind this corner, mashing down left click and, zapping anybody that goes to this door, that would be a problem, because even though Winston isn't as good in the brawl, if he already claims space that the Fusion are trying to take, he's not at much of a disadvantage, even though that the high ground isn't as much of a factor here, because his gun is area of effect, AoE, cleave, right? So every Ryan, Zarya, Diva, Lucio, Brig, whatever that tries to go through that door is going to be doing 60 DPS to each of them. I think that's 30 after the armor change, which is still significant damage, especially when you're running a Zenyatta, where the healing isn't a lot. That's going to outdamage Brig and Lucio Aura and Harmony Aura combined with just Winston Cleave. Now, it's not going to be enough to eliminate them quickly, but Winston's going to put out significant pressure. He's going to do so in his place where he's not super threatened, right? And he's also going to be building his Primal very quickly, which on this map, maybe that's another reason why Spitfire ran it. Primal is a great ult on this map. Numerous opportunities for environmental kills. So regardless, Spitfire doesn't think that trade is worth it. They think that they'd rather let the Fusion get there. Maybe it was because they messed up their bubble. Who knows? They're going to wait this one out and let Fusion go to the point, which is perfectly fine for Fusion. Fusion is very happy to do this. Now, this is interesting, and we're going to talk a little bit about this. Boombox sits behind. Boombox is slow to rotate here. So this is one of two things here. This is A, Philadelphia Fusion understands that Spitfire wants to aggressively jump here and maybe catch them in rotation and kill their Zenyatta, right? And Boombox goes, well, we know that they want to do that, so I'm not going to give them that, so I'm not going to rotate. I'm actually going to rotate through this way in a more safe manner once that dive has already been, like, once we're sure that the dive's not going to happen. Like, you can already see Spitfire is kind of committing here. Spitfire is kind of hungry, right? Maybe they wanted to catch the Zenyatta in rotation. I don't know that was it. My gut reaction is telling me that Boombox is just slow in rotation. Maybe this wasn't communicated well enough to his team. Regardless, we have Boombox here. And what this means is that Spitfire is split. Spitfire goes, do we go here or do we go here? Because Fusion is split. And so what happens is they recognize the fact that the Zenyatta is by himself, but thankfully Neptuno also notices. Again, I don't know if this is a designated play. This play didn't work, so I don't know exactly what it was supposed to do if this was a play in the Fusion side. But anyway, Lucio taxis Zenyatta out, and for whatever, yeah, so they try and rotate through this way, and then they rotate this way. I think if Spitfire could have big-brained this, they could have caught them here and kind of pincered with the Winston kind of cleaving in here and then being able to jump out to this high ground. So I don't know. I'm not going to sit here and break it down because regardless, he makes it out safely. So that was a little clunky. If that was a designated play, a big brain debate, I would love to know about it because I'm not sure what the plan was there. Okay, so now this is where things get really big and we start to talk about vision manipulation. Now, we could tab back over to the map here. And maybe we could say, I don't know, Winston can jump in here, right? So maybe we could say, alrighty, Winston, here's what I want you to do. We're gonna maybe jump you up here. Okay, thank you, Visor. We're gonna jump you up here, and then you're gonna drop into the back line after you get your leap out. And then we're gonna come crashing through and try and kill the Zarya or Brig or whatever, and maybe you can drop out and jump out to safety if you get pressured, or maybe jump back to high ground, and you know, something like that. And it's gonna be clunky though because of the low ceilings and tight corridors, and yeah, your cleave will be really valuable, but man, it's gonna be difficult, right? But they don't do that. So instead of us, remember how we talked about how floats wants to works? Like this is the front line for goats. Ignore the map here. We're just going to pretend it's different, okay? And this is the front line for, you know, floats, the Winston goats, the green X being the monkey. You know how the monkey jumps the back line, right? And then everybody from this turns around and deals with the monkey. Meanwhile, the front line of the Winston goats then crashes on top of them and kills the Zarya Brig. That's kind of how it functions. Well, that's not going to work here, really. Like, we could feasibly find a way to force it, but London doesn't force it. London takes the win condition of manipulating attention and then finding an elimination on a vulnerable target, and they twist it to something really clever. And I am 100% sure that this was intentional. And this is a beautiful, beautiful, this is a beautiful example, application of attention manipulation. So, obviously, you're the Spitfire here. How the heck do you get in here against a Reinhardt? Like, look at where the Zenyatta. Okay, the Zenyatta's inaccessible. He's right here. Diva's guarding door here. Brig's gonna be guarding door here. Ryan's gonna sit here and just anytime anybody even sticks an inch of their nose, you know, picking up the nose out there, smack them right with a hammer, right? So they're in serious trouble, right? The only way you're gonna be able to get in the back line, pay attention. The only way that you're going to be able to get on the back line is by forcing the backlight to somehow rotate. Now, how do you do that? How are you going to get this Brig or the Zen or Zarya or whatever hero that you want to kill, one of the squishier heroes, how are you going to get them to rotate in the point? They're just going to sit here. Are you going to go all the way around coast? Well, we're about to see this, and this is really, really impressive work. So right here, Jester chooses to jump through with bubble, Zarya personal and his bubble. Could have been a little better time there, I think. Yeah, definitely could have been better time. But regardless, he jumps through with bubble and draws attention through this door. There is now pressure through this door. There is now threat through this door. Okay? So this door is now being contested. Now this provokes a response, and rightly so, because this, if they give this up for free, then Fusion loses one of the big advantages that they had by going to point first, right? So this is a lot of blue, and they're going to be pushing through here. Now I want you to look at your screen very carefully. What do you see about the left side of your screen? Not all of Spitfire is on the right. We have both Prophet and Fury off on the left. But they're not applying pressure. I wonder why. And also, because of this pressure, because of this threat this direction, Boombox, well, where is Boombox? Boombox rotated away from the pressure that he anticipated from one side. But ladies and gentlemen, this was a fake. This was vision manipulation. There was London was not really interested in providing any serious threat from this side. It deserved a response. There was threat there, but nothing serious. This was just a tool to distract, manipulate vision, and force a rotation of the Zenyatta. Watch this. We're going to watch this. Can we watch this in slow motion? Yes, we can. Watch this, ladies and gentlemen. Vision. Look over here. I'm poking through. I'm a threat. I'm a threat. You see that? Look who's here. Who is that? Is that that's Nuss. That's a Lucio. Look at this. Boombox is now wildly out of position. We've got committing resources to this right side to counteract what the Spitfire brought to the table, and then they sneak it behind and they kill the Zenyatta. Beautiful. Now, this goes beyond just, oh, Boombox was out of position here. Boombox was not being sloppy and stupid here. I think as a coach, you could definitely sit down and talk with him about what we could have done better here. But credit needs to be given to the London Spitfire players and to the London Spitfire coaching staff, because this was a designed play. Now, I don't know if this was something that they sat in practiced and worked at, but this was completely intentional. This was not an accident. It's not an accident that pressure is faked through one way and an actual kill is sustained through another based off of the attention manipulation. Remember what we talked about with the floats win condition, about how it's using your Winston as a tool, as a threat to manipulate vision, to threaten somebody, to open up an opportunity for your the rest of your team to speed onto somebody. And we saw how that really, with this point, wasn't really an option, right? There's not enough open space. There's not enough high ground that you can easily manipulate, especially when they're sitting on a point. So what did London Spitfire did? They adapted that win condition, and they still found success with it, okay? So they say, okay, our Winston can't jump on... When we're playing in here, our Winston no longer can safely jump the backline without doing some absurd dropping from the top garbage, right? He can't jump the backline. That doesn't work. But fundamentally, Winston has to find a way to manipulate attention so that we can get a kill on a squishy, right? And so what do? Well, the nice thing about this point, right, is that we can, even though we can't distract the backline, or we can't get onto the backline, we can actually safely manipulate attention on the front line. And instead of using our bulk of our team to attack somebody like a Zarya and Brig on the front line, we can actually access the Zen. Because normally the Zen's way in the back, but the way this point is set up is there's really not a back, right? It's very tightly congested. So instead of trying to jump the back line and attack the front line, we're going to attack the front line and go for the back line. Something that's really only possible on a map or a point or a position like this. That type of floats wouldn't work on any other map or point, right? But it worked here because their Winston was able to go, hey, look at me. Boombox goes, oh crap, I'm going to move this way. And then there's the trap. So this was beautiful. And then and we continue to watch, and you know, the fights is cleaned up. Like, once you lose your Zen, you're at such a disadvantage, and it's like, there's Boombox, he's dead, and then now it's over. Now there's no Discord. The Winston can play aggressively. There's no Discord. There's no damage. He's just gonna sit in there with healing resources and cleave everybody to death, and that's it. Like, it was one concept that won Spitfire that fight. Like, this turned out to be a really good map, a really good fight to analyze, because a lot of times in fights, there's a lot of things that go wrong or go right. There wasn't a lot of things here. Like, we talked about a kind of a clunky Boombox rotation, but that didn't really have an impact on how the fight worked out. I was talking about the rotation earlier where he was over there. What actually, the only concept that was applied here was that attention manipulation. Using float's win condition and being creative with how you apply it in unfavorable circumstances.